The decision is hard because we're not prepared. A shot to win a game versus a shot in practice is the same shot. And so many people don't prepare for the moment, they react to the moment.
Welcome to ReedFlections. I'm Art Calderon. ReedFlections is a podcast on life, leadership, and learning. I'm here with Reed Nyffeler. Reed is a published author, seasoned podcaster, a husband, a father, and a CEO of a growing global franchising company. We're knee-deep in season 2 here, Reed, talking about leadership, about why developing leaders, who you should develop, what capacities do leaders need, where in the organization can your leaders grow, and currently we're talking about how, the actual tactile how to develop leaders. Now, episodes 20 through 23 is going to be demonstrate, delegate, motivate, and operate. Today is all about demonstrate. So, what are the most critical things for leaders to demonstrate for other aspiring leaders?
Yeah, and if we look throughout history, right, our result is building on the work of others going forward. And as a leader, developing other leaders, that's ultimately what we need to do. And things are way more caught than taught. And so that's demonstration, right, where we're showing them how we shall operate as opposed to telling them, right? It's really demonstrating our operational approach that is effective versus just saying, you should do this, right? And anytime we get that you should do this advice, we always take, well, that's not what you're doing. And that's where authenticity comes in.
Good. So which one, you mentioned authenticity. What's a way that a leader actually demonstrates that authenticity?
Yeah, so I think, there's nothing more critical than doing what you're teaching, right? And so, one of the things my wife is really good at is she's a dancer. And so she's been dancing for literally decades. That is authentic to who she is. She thinks in an 8 count, I think. I don't even know. And then
not so much, though.
No, and she teaches dance. So, one of the things our family enjoys, or I would say that our children enjoy, and they enjoy watching me struggle with, is the game Just Dance. And so my oldest daughter and my wife have a dance off, regularly, and they both were dancers. And unfortunately, my wife is not winning as often as she would like, but she really enjoys it. They love it. That's something they enjoy doing, and it's natural. And so they continue to do that. And then as a result, my wife teaches dance. She will, there's a pageant a Christmas pageant that she does annually, and she teaches dance. And she just really enjoys it, and she's a natural dancer. Now, that's authentic to who she is and what she does well. However, in my case, that's not me. Now, I could learn the steps.
Oh, yeah.
I could study the dance.
Your repertoire would be pretty limited.
It would be pretty limited at the same time as they would clearly see that I'm not a dancer when I'm communicating that. And it would be they wouldn't learn well as students, and it wouldn't be able to pass that along. So why do I share that? Because if we don't already learn, do, and already embody the things we're teaching, we're not going to be an effective leader. And so make sure you're communicating the right tools and techniques that you're already demonstrating on that side. And so as an example, I consider myself a pretty good driver, and so I've had 3 different children that have learned to drive. However, one area that I do not communicate because I don't demonstrate it, and I do not want to be hypocritical, is adhering to the posted speed limit, candidly.
We might want to get the opinion of the state patrol.
Yeah. Well, we don't necessarily need to ask them their opinion. I think they communicate that to me when I've visited with them.
It's documented.
Yeah, I've gotten that, documented. But at the same time I signal every time. So if my kids need a signal, I remind them of that. I don't follow too closely. I brake appropriately. And of course, they're there. However, if they exceed the speed limit, I just decide not to communicate on that. Not that it's right to do.
Your credibility.
My credibility is not entirely there. And so I think that's an example of authenticity, is we have to really look inside to say, if I'm going to communicate something, am I doing it? And that is the first step, is saying, do I embody what I communicate? And ultimately, that's the step to authenticity, is make sure that you are consistently, not just in front of them, but consistently doing what you're communicating, because I think followers can see that. You're saying, you're asking me to do this, but you don't do it. If you're asking me to show up on time, but you're constantly late, how can that's not authentic, right? And so we want to make sure that we embody the behaviors we're teaching, and that is the first step of demonstrating.
All right, so talk about those times, because leadership is highs and lows of emotion. It could be, right, if you allow yourself to be drug into that temptation of being dictated by your emotions. So when is it easiest? When is it hardest to demonstrate that authenticity?
Yeah, I think first of all, we as humans look at circumstance and then add a whole bunch of weight to that. And so, as a simple example, the decision inherently of a good or bad decision doesn't change if it's a $20 decision or a $20,000 decision, right? A $20 decision can still be a bad financial decision if we never use what we invest in as much as a $20,000 decision. The only thing that's changed is the dollars. And I'll give an example. So my oldest son got this longboard. And we had a conversation, and he said he's ridden his longboard 1,000 miles. I'm like, wow, that's a lot of miles on a longboard.
Wow.
It says some sort of odometer, I guess. And this longboard was $500. So I said, that's 50 cents a mile. And actually, a car is more efficient than 50 cents a mile. And, I know you keep your cars very long term. So if you buy a car and you drive it 400,000 miles, I mean, that's just warming up, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
400,000,
just breaking it in.
You're just getting, you're getting that deep rut in your seat. You know what I mean? And your armrest is there and you've worn off the wall.
Yeah.
You can always repaint these things 3 or 4 times, right? But that's 8 cents a mile. If you take that 400,000 miles over a $20,000 investment, that's substantially less than the cost of this longboard, plus gallons of fuel, et cetera, et cetera. So, and oil, you're pouring that thing in constantly. So maybe you're at 30 cents a mile, but nonetheless, it's still less than the longboard. And so then it didn't matter if it was a $500 decision for a longboard or a expense on a vehicle. The decision, not the cost, $500, $20,000 in a car, was still better per mile. For that particular thing. Of course, there's more utility to a car. You can have more people on it and other things like that. At the same time, as I offered the other alternative, you can get a bike. You can ride that unlimited, right? And there's really no maintenance
nearly
cost.
as fun, though, huh?
I mean, that's up to him to decide. But I mean, we can really look at that or get something used, right? And we can look at a $50 bike instead of a $500 longboard and go further. And so those are all the things that are ultimately there. And so I think that's where it comes down to the moment, meaning the $10,000 expense or the $20,000 expense is not. We emotionalize the moment instead of looking at the practice or the utility of that. And I'll give another example. So a shot inherently to win a game versus a shot in practice is the same shot, right? If you are taking the exact same shot, the moment is all that changed. And so many people don't prepare for the moment. They react to the moment. And so what does preparation look like? How do you make easy decisions at a big scale? Is you make that decision consistently in practice. And I think that's where a lot of leaders fail. And that's where demonstration comes in, is we need to practice making good decisions so that when faced with a moment, we're prepared. And so we see this consistently in many different environments. And so, EMS response, right? There is an emergency that's there, but I can assure you that is not the first time they've administered CPR.
Right.
They are literally practicing administering CPR on dummies, on circumstance where it's not life-threatening. And then when it is life-threatening, they're prepared. So then they can approach that with calm. They can do that. And that is essentially demonstrating in those environments, practicing consistently. Then when there's an emergency, life-threatening situation, that decision is easier. So ultimately, what am I saying in response to your question? The decision is hard because we're not prepared. Because we didn't take the effort to demonstrate appropriately, authentically. We didn't practice consistently, and it makes it a super difficult decision because we don't know the likelihood of the outcome, because we don't know what to do that would lead to a higher likelihood of the outcome we're hoping for.
So you've seen a lot of leaders in your career and your life. Share with us a couple of some examples of people who actually demonstrated this that you saw and you were able to witness.
And I've always, first and foremost, watch for authenticity of a leader. When I listen to a speaker, I'm saying, if they know this is what the audience wants to hear from them, or is this inherently who they are? Right. And we see that with good actors, right? We know that they are really embodying the character, and we can see that in there, or we can say this is a terrible actor because that's not inherently who they are. And some of that comes down to casting. And so I saw that witness throughout life. And, one of the things I wrestled in high school, as I might have mentioned earlier on the podcast, and it was great to see people, my wrestling coach in high school, he was very authentic, and he was certainly different, more, maybe a little bit more crass than maybe I was at the time, and probably a little bit more rough around the edges.
Coaches tend to be that way.
Especially in high school, sometimes. At the same time what I really appreciated was he used what he was authentic to him to improve my skills, but also let me be myself. And so what I recognized at that time was that, hey, use what is transferable in our skill set, but I was never going to be the wrestler that he was, meaning his skill set, his style, his approach was not inherent to who I was. But there were elements of that that were going to be effective for who I was. And he cared about my development, not him, not his arrogance of showing me how good he was.
Uh,
And I think that was something I took from that to say he had the humility to teach me a skill that I could use, not show me how good he was at something on the other side. And so, years later, decade later, I was with a wrestler that I had been in the state finals with actually at the time. And he said, hey, come to a practice with me. And we happened to be with one of his friends. He has trained some Olympic wrestlers and he's, that was just his passion. And he wrestled in college and was a national champion in Division II. And then he continued on that and has children. And so he come to the practice. And here I was watching him carry that forward. It's like, it was when I was watching the practice, what I saw was he was building credibility immediately with the group. And so he would do a couple of drills and they're like, this guy actually knows what he's doing. And what I watched there, and this was maybe subconscious for him, but somewhat conscious to say, hey, in order for you to listen to the skills I'm giving you, that we have one single practice, I need to show you that this isn't just me telling you because I'm reading it off a whiteboard, which is typically what you're going to find in an environment like that. But I've done this and it's worked and I'm a champion as a result. And I'll demonstrate that even in my 40s for you, that I can still do it, maybe. And this is why I'm teaching you this. And so that was the first step. The second thing that he did was he broke down the steps so they could, on a small scale, be able to do it, right? And so that was the other side. He demonstrated that skill in a step-by-step fashion so that there was an understanding they could do. And then as a result, you saw their skill development accelerate. Why? Because he demonstrated first. He broke it down in step-by-step that they could adhere to versus saying, hey, wow, that was a great show. Do it again. And so we're not transferring skills if we're just showing them. We have to show them in a demonstration that we're authentically able to do it and then break it down into steps that they can then practice through the demonstration.
That was the authenticity was clear.
Right.
He was doing.
Like, one, I showed you I can do it. Two, I'm going to break it down into steps that are tangible. Three, I'm going to coach you along to ultimately help you improve your skills in that same approach.
It reminds me of an uncle that I have, a retired California Highway Patrol officer. And he had been a patrol officer for several years. This is back when I was just a kid. And he told me this story. He was giving a ticket to someone, and at the same time, I heard this loud explosion. He turned around, and this vehicle had plowed into a tree, had caught fire, and it was exploding because the driver was a hunter. He had ammunition in the vehicle, and he had a propane in the vehicle. It was a camper. And he told the guy who was writing the tickets, your lucky day, get lost. And he ran over there or drove over there and went into the vehicle while the bullets were zinging around. He had a knife. He cut the seatbelt and drugged this guy out and saved his life. He told me that story. And I asked him to share it with my kids years ago when my kids were little. And he actually started choking up, 50 years later because it was so real. He ended up getting an award by the governor. At the time, it was Ronald Reagan. And as a kid, I went to the ceremony. And I remember seeing it. And the only thing I remember was like, look, all these cops with all their white gloves and their guns. I thought it was so cool, But absolutely authentic when it mattered. It was not the first time he had been in a dangerous situation or trained, as you were talking about, trained for a dangerous situation. He did not hesitate. He moved, he acted. And not only did he save that guy's life, but he inspired, dozens or even hundreds of other people because he had that authenticity and he was ready when it mattered.
Yeah, and that's the power of authentic leadership that's demonstrated, right? Is because then it's practiced, and then ultimately in the moment it can inspire. Whereas that's what carries it forward. If we are just doing a task for the checklist, then it's not going to be carried forward. It's going to be forgotten when nobody's there watching. And so if we really want to develop leaders, we need to inspire them to continue the habits and behaviors. And that shows them the result of what that could be. And that's a broad demonstration, a great story of your uncle in that regard.
Yeah. Uncle Vince, good man. So now it's one thing to be able to dictate or verbalize that, but how can leaders keep themselves accountable to actually live it and demonstrate it and not just say it, not just speak it, not just teach it on a whiteboard?
Well, I think that's self-awareness, right? I mean, one of the things is we develop as leaders, we lose sight of his self-awareness, right? We can become so enamored with our performance, our ability, and our capabilities that we lose sight of the details. We become complacent over time, basically, because we become so proficient. And the example that I'll use is driving to work, right? I mean, the first time we drive to work at a new job or a new place or from a new house, we're concentrating on the lights, which streets we're on, left, right, and turn. And then pretty soon, 6, 12, 24 months later, whatever it is for you, we're like, how do I get to work? I don't remember making all these turns, and I don't remember traffic, and I don't remember what was going on. That happens in any leadership decision, right? The first time we're trying something, we're hyper focused on so many things. We're adjusting skills and everything else. Then pretty soon we're cutting people off in traffic, not paying attention. We're speeding, and we don't even realize we got to work. And that's how leadership works too. We're there. We just go through the paces. We become complacent. And so we want to maintain self-awareness. And so that's where, again, one of the things I use for myself is sequential triggers, right? And if for the first season of the podcast, we kind of talk through those sequences,
Right.
Daily, weekly, hourly, even momentarily, because that keeps me self-aware. And it's saying, okay, I'm going to a new meeting, right? How am I going to leverage this moment, right? Even as I prepare for this podcast, I'm saying, what is the moment that I communicate something that otherwise would transform, right, someone else's life so that they can be a more authentic leader and demonstrate that. And so that's a trigger every time for me, so that I don't become complacent and I don't just say things that won't have impact, because I understand the power of a moment. And so we are self-aware. And I think what we do is we put milestones in there to maintain humility through it all, but also make sure that we don't become complacent.
Talk a little bit more about that approach that you have for demonstrating those tangible skills for future leaders.
Well, I think there's 3 steps, right? The first is prepare, the second is perform, and the third is review. And I think the first one is prepare. Don't just stand in that moment. It's just back to the story of your uncle. He wasn't, he was preparing probably for decades. That a moment may never happen that's an emergency moment where he needs to react, but he's prepared, right? He had the appropriate thing to cut the seatbelt. He knew how to open the door in that scenario. He knew how to be aware of the other environment and when he should leave what was less critical, writing the ticket or whatever the case might have been, to something that was more critical. And he had prepared for all those scenarios, even if it may never have happened in his case. Then perform. That was the second step. He knew this was the time to perform. He wasn't afraid. He didn't have to manage his own emotions. He didn't have to question whether he should do it or not. He didn't have to hesitate, because if he did, a life was ending. And then I'm sure, and that's what that ceremony was, he reviewed. That's a third step, saying, now, people, I'm sure, were using that story and scenario to be inspired to continue to train, even if they don't have their moment, to be ready when the opportunity came to perform, and then review tools, techniques, and improvement afterwards. And if we look at those 3 things, they're super important in every progression. And so, as I was reading a different book, I realized that's ultimately Thomas Edison is an inventor. And so he invented, obviously, the light bulb, among many other things. He knew the elements that would otherwise conduct a heat or warmth or light. He then performed. He was in there. But every time he'd fail, he would review and say, what didn't work? Instead of just trying once and failing, or not having the appropriate resources there, right? And this is indicative of our leadership. What do we need to prepare? And I think what we can do as leaders to get super tangible is simplify it. Don't look at, I want to be a great leader. Of course we do. What skill is component of a great leader? And I would ask the question for those who are listening to say, what skills do you consider a great leader? And list 5 of them. Start with that. Then break down one of those skills and say, of one of those skills, authenticity, let's say, what does authenticity mean? Then break that down another step. In my life, what does authenticity look like? Then I prepare to have authenticity. I practice authenticity in those skills. And then I review and say, was I authentic in this environment, right? And so if authenticity means, going back to my demonstrating driving, means that I need to adhere to the speed limit, right, in my life. And if I'm going to teach my child, how long should I demonstrate that in my life before I communicate it, right? So if I say, you know what, I need to, work on my speeding. So for 90 days, right, I feel like that's a period of time where we can learn a habit to be authentically at least able to teach it.
Yeah.
We learn that, right?
And you can start that today.
I could. Thank you for offering that suggestion. I'll consider that. I start today. And then we prepare. We say, okay, what do I need to do? Every time I look at the speed limit first, and then I drive that appropriate speed limit, and I do that consistently, I got to perform. Then I review and say, hey, was life so bad going way slow, getting there 10 minutes later than I would have otherwise got there? Is that so bad? As well. And I review my performance. And I think that's an example of developing that as a skill authentically so that we could ultimately demonstrate it.
Being purposeful. Very good. That brings us to the end of our time here, folks. Thank you so much for joining us for Demonstrate, some authenticity ideas and some tangible things. Thank you very much, Reed, for sharing with us. Thank you, listeners. We appreciate you. 21, episode 21 of season 2 is coming up next time. Delegate. That sounds like a tricky one. Delegate. And then I heard a wise person say, others can't soar in leadership unless someone gives them a chance to spread their wings. Sounds like a Hallmark card, but it's an actual thing. Very good. In the meantime, I'm Art Calderon, and be purposeful.
For those of you who want to pass along your leadership skills and do so in a tactical way, the first thing you need to do is demonstrate, and that requires authenticity. And so the framework for demonstrating is to prepare, perform, then review. Look at an area that you are struggling with authenticity. The first place to demonstrate is within you. Be self-aware. Understand an area that you need to prepare, then ultimately perform in that area, and then review that. You'll be well on your way to demonstrate authentically the tools and techniques necessary to be a leader that changes lives. Go and perform.